my name is Kara and today I'm going to show you how to knit a chunky knit cardigan. So this is a tutorial for the chunky game set match cardigan. So this is one of my patterns. I'm currently wearing the chunky game set match top and the cardigan. So if you're looking to make the top, I'll link it up here. This is Keegan, by the way. He's curious about what I'm doing on the floor. So I'm just going to go through the pattern and kind of walk you through how to do each step. So to follow along, you are going to need the pattern itself, and you can get that on my Etsy, my Ravelry, or my website. And if you use code YouTube, you can get 15% off the pattern. But I love this pattern. I love making this set so much. Like, I made a bunch of these tops for the summer just because they're cute, they're short, they're fun, and it's a nice way to bring super chunky wool into the summer. But now that the weather's cooling off just a teensy tiny bit, I am gonna be making the matching cardigan a bunch because who doesn't love a matching set? So for this set, I used the Malabrigo Rasta in colorway Lettuce here, and I really love Malabrigo Rasta. It's a super wash, so it's super soft, and like, say you ever want to repurpose the yarn, it's really easy to unravel. I also think that the colorways are amazing. Like, I love, love, love all the colors that Rasta comes in. But I've also made this set in Crazy Sexy Wool from Wool and the Gang and We Are Knitters the Wool. I believe you can also use Cascade Yarn's Magnum to make this set as well. And you might even want to play around and hold multiple strands of yarn together to give that super bulky effect, because I know that super bulky yarn is kind of hard to come by. But without further ado, let's get into the pattern itself. For materials, you're going to need 12mm circular needles, and they do need to be circular because you're going to be knitting in the round. I recommend having a cord length of about 24 to 32 inches, just because that's what I find works best with all the parts of the pattern. And you're also going to need yarn. And this does need to be super chunky yarn because this is supposed to be a chunky knit. But if you're looking for a lighter weight cardigan, I recommend checking out my Game Set Match cardigan. The next step is kind of optional, kind of not. I really recommend doing it, but I've definitely been guilty of skipping it before too. And this is just to double check your gauge. So knitting a little tension swatch. So this is just to make sure that the material that you get from your needle and your yarn is working for you, and that's what you want. So this is especially important if you're experimenting with yarns or just using a yarn that isn't necessarily super chunky. So you should get a gauge of about 8 stitches by 12 rows on 12mm needles in stockinette to get about a 4x4 inch square. And if your gauge isn't perfect, it's probably okay because this is a pretty forgiving pattern. Like, it's supposed to be a nice oversized cardigan, and you can always add length if things aren't working out. Next, you're going to choose your size, and keep in mind that this is supposed to be an oversized cardigan. So there's going to be sizes extra small to 5X. The first number is for extra small, the last number is for 5X. All the parentheses help delineate between those sizes. So just keep in mind that if you're a size large, you're going to be looking at the 4th number at every instruction row. Now for the actual pattern, you are going to cast on your designated number of stitches. And here I like to use a cable cast on, but you can totally use a long tail cast on here as well. I already have my slip knot on the needle, but I'm going to insert my needle, wrap my yarn, and then pull it through and over, and this is how you do a cable cast on. So I'm just going to repeat this until I have the appropriate number of stitches. Once you've casted on all your stitches, you're going to start with your ribbing. So you're going to knit one, purl one, knit one, purl one to the end of the row. And once you've finished that row, you're just going to turn your work and do the exact same thing because you're knitting this cardigan flat first. Once you've done the ribbing, you're going to work in stockinette to add length to the back of your cardigan. So this is just knitting one row and then purling the next row, back and forth until you add enough length for the back. And if you want to add more length to your cardigan, I recommend doing it here, keeping in mind that you also need to do it for the front panels as well. Now you're going to divide for the panel, so you're going to knit the number of stitches you need for the right panel, and you're going to cast off the stitches in the middle, then knit the stitches that you need for the left panel. Now you'll continue to work on the left panel, so leave your stitches for the right panel on hold. You can put that on a scrap piece of yarn, you can leave them on the needles, just ignore that for now. And you're going to continue to work in stockinette on your left panel until your piece measures the appropriate length. And for this pattern, when I say right and left, I mean right and left as in when you wear the cardigan itself. Now we're going to be doing our increases, and because we're working on the left panel, we're going to make a right-leaning increase so it can give you that cardigan inward look. I don't know what this is called, but I don't even know what I call it in my head. Anyways, so you're going to be doing a make one right. First, you're going to knit your edge stitches, and then you're going to find the bar in between these stitches where I'm pointing at, and you're going to use your left needle to pick it up from the back to the front. And then you're just going to knit as normal. Then you're just going to purl across the row, and then you're going to turn your work and do another increase. And you'll continue these purl rows and increase rows until you reach the appropriate number of stitches. Then you'll just continue to add length to the panel of your cardigan. Once your cardigan panel is the appropriate length, you're just going to start your ribbing. So you're going to knit one, purl one, knit one, purl one to the end of the row until you've done the appropriate number of rows, and then you're just going to cast off and ribbing. And leave a long tail after your cast off because you can use this tail to seam up the sides later. Reattach your yarn to the stitches of the right panel and attach to the side closer to the neckline, and then knit and stockinette until you reach the appropriate length. Now you're going to be doing increases, and so because this is the right panel, you're going to be doing left leading increases. You're going to make one left. You're going to knit until you have just your edge stitches left. Then you're going to find that bar between these stitches. Using your left needle, you're going to pick it up with the front to the back. You're going to knit that stitch through the back loop, and then continue to knit the edge stitches as normal. Once you've increased to the appropriate number of stitches, you are just going to continue to add length and knit and stockinette. Then you're going to knit and ribbing, cast off and ribbing, and then leave a long tail for seaming. Now we're going to seam with our mattress stitch to close up the sides of the panels so that we can get like the full body of the cardigan. So I recommend taking a locking stitch marker and measuring from the top of the cardigan down to where you want the armhole to stop. Place your stitch marker between the two panels and then seam up from the bottom using mattress stitch to close up that side. Once we've placed that stitch marker, we are going to thread our long tail from our cast off through a tapestry needle, and we're going to use mattress stitch here. So it's a little bit tricky with ribbing, but I recommend going about one column in from each side just to make it a little bit neater. And you're just going to find a bump from a purl and thread your needle through, then find another bump from another purl and thread your needle through. And you just continue this until you finish the ribbing portion, and then you move on to seaming the stockinette portion. Now for the stockinette portion, we are just going to find the bar in the middle of the V of these stitches, pick it up and thread it through, and then just repeat that with the other side. And again, it's a little bit easier if you pick up stitches about 1 to 2 columns in from the edge. Once you've done that for both sides, you can now work on the button band. And in the pattern, I say that you should do the sleeves first, but I actually like to do the button band first because there's kind of less cardigan to move around. It's a little bit easier to maneuver. So starting at the bottom right panel, moving up the right panel around the back, and I recommend picking up stitches a little bit below the neckline itself just to kind of make the button band sit a little bit better on the cardigan. Then around and down the left panel, you're going to pick up the stitches for the button band. And for a neater button band, I recommend picking up stitches about 1 to 2 columns in from the edges of your panels. And you don't have to pick up the exact number of stitches as I say in the pattern because it's not as important as long as it's an even number. However, I would err towards going more for those approximations just because you don't want to pick up too little stitches and have your button band be too tight. So if it's a choice between too little or too many, I would kind of err towards too many because it looks better than if you have too little stitches for the button band. So take your needle and insert it into the piece about 1 to 2 columns in from the edge. Take your yarn and wrap it around your needle and pull it through to the other side. Then insert your needle again and wrap your yarn and pull it through. And if you pull apart your piece a little bit, you can see the gaps where you want to insert your needle. And for a neat button band, you need to make sure you're picking up from the same column, so about 1 to 2 columns in, and make sure that that's consistent throughout. So once you've picked up all your stitches for your button band, you're just going to start your ribbing. So knit 1, purl 1, knit 1, purl 1 to the end of the row. And you're going to be doing this for a few rows. So if you want a smaller button band, you can always take off rows. If you want a longer button band, you can always add rows. I don't recommend adding too many rows because then the back of your button band will sit a little bit oddly. But once you're done, just cast off loosely in ribbing pattern. So now's a good chance to weave in all your ends because you're done with the body of the cardigan. You don't have to do this, but I really recommend it so that the task of weaving in all your ends isn't so big at the end. Now for our last step, we are going to do the sleeves. So you're going to use your 12mm needles to pick up the stitches for the sleeves. While picking up stitches for the sleeves, I recommend picking up stitches about 1 to 2 columns in from the edge, just to make it a little bit easier on yourself when you're making sure that all of these stitches you pick up are from the same column. So very similar to how you did the button band, you're just going to insert your needle and wrap your yarn and pull it through to the other side and repeat this until you picked up enough stitches for these sleeves. And make sure that you're picking up from about the same column for a neat edge. Once you've picked up all the stitches for the sleeves, you're just going to start knitting in the round. So place a stitch marker and just start going. And you're just going to knit until you have the right length for your sleeve. After placing a stitch marker at the beginning of the round, you're going to knit the first row. And be careful with this one because you might accidentally pull out the yarn that you used to pick up stitches. So just make sure that you can pull it so that you don't accidentally lose that stitch. And then you're just going to knit in the round. And I recommend trying on the sleeves as you go just to make sure that it's the right length for your arms. And keep in mind that doing the bottom ribbing will add about 2 to 3 inches to your sleeves. Now you're going to do decreases for the cuff, so you're just going to knit 2 together until the end of the row. Once you've decreased the appropriate number of stitches, you're just going to do your ribbing once again. So knit 1, purl 1, knit 1, purl 1, and then finally you're going to cast off and ribbing. Finally, you're going to cut your yarn and pass it through the last stitch. And if you notice that there's a bit of a gap between the edges, you're going to thread your needle through that tail. And you're just going to insert into the top V of the first stitch and then thread it through the top V of the last stitch. And from there, you're just going to weave in your ends. And make sure you don't pull too tight, but that should help close any gap that you get. You can also do a tubular bind off here if you want to stretch your cuff. However, I find that because it's super chunky yarn, you don't really need that, and the cast off is stretchy enough. Finally, just repeat for the other sleeve. And we are done. That was the entire Chunky Game Set Match cardigan. Hopefully that was a pretty straightforward pattern. If you have any other questions, feel free to leave me a comment or reach out to me. I love, love, love making these sets, and the only reason why I don't have a million of them is just because I don't have enough room for them. But now you too can make your own knit set. Hope you have as much fun with it as I do. Thank you so much for supporting me and my patterns. Hope you have a lovely rest of your day. Happy knitting and see ya.